Vistelar, addressing the entire spectrum of human conflict.
Hi, my name is Dave Young, Director and Founder of Armored Training, U.S. Fighting Systems, and a Co-Director of Vistelar. I'd like to discuss our program for teachers, educators, and safety training for preparing for the active shooter. You know, I have over 30 plus years of training and experience as a corrections officer, a police officer, and a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. I sit and chair on many professional advisory boards. I listen to some of the problems, not only from the teachers and educators when I'm in their schools, but also from the police agencies who have to respond to these terrible events. I write in several publications, from Police Magazine, a technical advisor for the Force Science Research Institute, and I'm a chairman for PoliceOne.com advisory board. I've also hosted several shows on National Geographic for not only police technology, but for tactics and training. And I can tell you that I've conducted threat and risk assessments from American embassies on military installations, hospitals, casinos, treatment facilities, to as well as middle school, elementary school, and high schools, to include several tech colleges, community colleges, and universities around the country. And I can tell you they all share not only the same dangers, but some of the same common problems. There are three most common issues regarding these safety issues. Number one is lack of communication. We find the lack of communication between the staff and the students is great. And not only is that lack of communication not there between the teachers and the students on what to do, there's also some and disconnects between the administration and those educators and teachers as well on what they're able to do. Also, failing to adequately prepare and train for these events. Most people would rather have fire talks than conducting fire drills. Gary T. Klugowitz has shared a very good quote with me that I think is very relevant to preparing for an active shooter, or really for any dangerous situation. If you can predict it, you can prevent it. And that has been a quote that I've actually tried to use and apply to every training program we do for teachers, students, and educators. The purpose of this training program is to provide the teachers and educators and their staff with the necessary tools that increase their awareness, provide them options, and make the most effective decisions possible under the most stressful and ever-changing situations, while maintaining the safety and welfare of their staff and students. Over the years, there's been several trends that we've had to deal with as educators for not only their own safety, but for what the students have maybe compromised that safety. You know, you can remember back in the day where truancy was a really big problem in schools. And then truancy went to usually unruly students when they wouldn't leave. Then it went to bullying, which has been around the country. It's more highlighted now than it was, 40, 50 years ago. There's always been drugs and alcohol use inside these classrooms. There's been sexual abuse, date violence. There's been fighting in gangs that have been dominant in a lot of schools around the country, no matter what financial bracket you're in. There's always been problems with domestic violence. And you even see attacks from students attacking their teachers in the classroom. There's also been the selection of drugs and alcohol and actually drug distribution in different schools, not only in your colleges and universities, but as well as your elementary schools and middle schools too. There's been problems with weapon carrying, there's been problems with dropouts. And usually just before a child drops out, they've tried to really voice as much help and concern as possible, and usually it leads to suicide if they don't get the answers to the questions they need so desperately. And when they don't do suicide, they have other different ways of doing that, which is why we have the discussion of the active shooter. But I want to ask a question to all teachers is, have they been really trained in emergency trauma training? And what does that really mean? Have they had training in weapon training? Do they know how to make a weapon safe, take a magazine out, use the weapon if they had to, if their life depended upon it? Has there been emergency response training that they've received? What about the tactical decisions that need to be made during those moments when bullets come through the door in the classroom, or if the smoke turns from white to black? When is it time to leave and where do they go? And are they really being trained in educating, or are they just being hopeful, which a hope and a prayer has never really been a tactic in any major environment I've been in? Do they have weapon disarming training, how to take those weapons away from them? And then, what about verbal defense and influence? How do you talk to a student who's pointing a gun at you or acting irrational? Sometimes you cannot take a rational approach to some of these situations. You know, there's been some changing trends and definitions over the years. From the 1950s to the 1960s, kids were suspended or kicked out of school for cursing in class, inappropriate clothing, or smoking. But then in the 1970s to 1980s, we started suspending kids from school from drinking in the school, pornography in the classroom, or fighting in class. From 1990 to 2000, these trends have changed to violence on school property, stealing from the school, and the sale of drugs or using them. From 2000 to 2010, there's been weapons on the property, violence to the teachers and students all over the internet, to include rape and murder. And from 2010 to the present date, now we have focus of bullying, which have been very violent related incidents, to disruption of school property, destroying it, vandalizing it, breaking it, setting it on fire. And now we have the active shooter, which are really planned assassinations or suicide by the student. There are three things I want to leave each teacher as they go through these sections. Number one, always remain alert. Number two, be decisive in your decisions. And three, have a pre-planned response.